Hi there, welcome. I'm joined today by three of the best and brightest at Spectro Cloud, plus myself and from the marketing team. So I'm going to be spending a lot of this video silent. We have with me, and I will turn on their lower third so you can see their names. We have Erra, who is in our engineering and operations team, so looks after running our product. We've got Justin Barksdale, JB, from our solution architect team, distinguished solution architect, and Ray Krueger, the newest hire, more or less, in that team, recently joined us from AWS, which is very relevant because we are here today to talk about this architecting for resilience. On Monday this week, just a couple of days before we're filming this, AWS had probably its biggest outage in 5 years, and lots of stuff fell off the internet. We figured, since we are a cloud native company, we would be very well placed to talk about what to do to deal with this kind of situation and how we can keep apps and infrastructure up and running. So let's get started. I want to go to you first, Ray, because you are so recently ex AWS. What's your take on the whole outage we've had this week, and what does it tell us about the way that services are architected and built, and what can we learn from it?
Yeah, happy to talk about that a little bit. Yeah, I'm Ray Krueger. I'm here at Spectro Cloud now, but I spent the previous 8 years or so at AWS working on cloud and container stuff. The important thing to think about, like how AWS is structured, right? AWS has regions. Every region is made up of availability zones. Every region has at least 3 availability zones. You can think of an AZ as a physical data center, but usually they're actually more than one data center, just really close to each other. But effectively, every region has at least 3 availability zones. So when you're running in an AWS region across multiple availability zones, you're already in a better place than a lot of like on-premises deployments. You're already running in multiple data centers in a geographically dispersed region, right? So that's an important concept. But then when it comes to the regions themselves, right? US East 1, most infamously here, versus US East 2 in Ohio, West 2 in Oregon, those are all, different networks, different physical areas, different geographically dispersed data centers, right? So all of that in context to say, when the media says AWS is down, the important thing to look at is all of AWS down? That's usually not the case. The case is usually there's a region outage, and usually it's US East 1. And so in this case, it was US East 1 being down in the region. So a lot of the conversations that we had with customers and we currently have with customers is about resiliency in the cloud and how to architect for that, right? And it does come down to like business decision, right? What are our recovery time objectives, recovery point objectives, RTO and RPO? Where do we want to invest our money in avoiding downtime for our customers, right? So the base recommendation from AWS is always be ready for multiple regions, right? Be ready to fail over to another region. So if US East 1 is down, we fail over to US East 2. Provided control planes and things like that aren't impacted. There's just so many layers of it depends to this conversation, right? But looking at multi-region resiliency is kind of the foundational aspect, right? Of course, we start with availability zones. That's table stakes. That's HA, but that's not disaster recovery, right? If we need to DR out of US East 1, we should be looking at other regions, right? So that's a kind of staple recommendation for really any AWS user, any AWS customer.
And so all of the services that fell over, some of them big household names, one of them being the spectrocloud.com website provider. Shout out to you, Webflow. What did they do wrong?
I don't know what they did wrong. I don't work at Webflow, but what I do know is that failing over to another region, again, there's just so many layers of it depends. There's so many layers of like how these things can work, right? We have to replicate data. That's the first and foremost thing. That's the most complicated aspect of any of this. How do we replicate data to make sure that we're able to sync up and fail over to another region? So in the case of any web application, right? If you're dealing with a bunch of like static web content, like a marketing website like spectrocloud.com, right? Like a lot of that can live in CloudFront. A lot of that will be distributed to the edge and is not in US East 1. So what we did see, for example, like our homepage seemed to work for everybody. That seemed to be entirely cached out on out at the edge. I say CloudFront, but I don't know if it's CloudFront.
Mm.
Entirely cached out at the edge, whereas other pages did not seem to be. They seemed to be trying to phone home, and those were failing to get back to US-East-1.
Makes sense. So Shri, when I saw the news about the AWS outage, the first thing I did was headed into Slack and was like, "Is our product down? We are, after all, by default a SaaS platform, and we run in AWS." And luckily, or maybe luck hasn't got anything to do with it. Pallet wasn't affected by this outage. So, you and in the operations side of our business, what was it about our round of applause for that first of all. What was it about the way that we have architected and built our SaaS platform that meant that it wasn't affected by this outage?
Thanks, Ant. This is a great question, right? So, first of all, as an ops leader, you get called 100 different people and say, "Hey, what's going on? Is it up? Is it up?" Right? I tell you, it's very, very important, like Ray was mentioning, to really understand how do you architect your solution, how you architect your platform. Until you deploy in multiple regions, not only multiple AZs, you will not be able to stand up your platform in a way that customers doesn't see the downtime, right? So we have deployed in US East 1, US East 2, US West 1. So we have the redundancy not only at the availability zone, but also at region level. That's why we stood high, and we might have seen little bit of slowness in performance, but we are not at all down. We looked at multiple tools, the uptime tools, to see whether we are seeing any downtime, or any of our customers are having issues. We have not seen. That is one big architectural decision we have done earlier part of the platform deployment. And this time it really proved us that whatever we built really worked for our customers.
Fantastic. Some comfortable SREs not taking 2 a.m. pages for a change.
The lack of
Justin,
panic was
yeah.
I was pretty excited about that. Yeah.
Yes, we do like a week without panic. That would be good. Justin, you've been here. Well, I was going to say longer than
4 years.
me, but it is definitely a few years now. And you work with customers all day in all kinds of situations. You're my edge guy. I come to you for edge deployments, so I know that not every customer is using our SaaS. You want to talk to me about some of the architectural stuff that goes beyond that multi-tenant SaaS situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is, we provide our customers choice. So while you can deploy in multi-region, as Shri talked about, in Amazon or really in any cloud, we also support for customers that need an on-prem deployment in their own data center, or maybe they have their own resiliency plan, or in an air-gapped environment. We give customers that choice. I think a lot of just to pivot back for just a second to what Shri and Ray were both talking about, I think part of the challenge with designing today is that there's still a lot of legacy applications that were ported to the cloud for one reason or another. And those applications are really difficult to do things like provide that high availability across multiple regions. As Ray mentioned, like the data is the hardest part. And we have a couple of customers now who are talking to us. So how do we provide the resiliency when our application doesn't withstand a ping loss? It's really, really challenging if your application is not built in a way that provides some type of flexibility. And so I think when we set out to build Palette, we really focused on that high availability, cloud native, that type of architecture, so we could provide this type of resiliency. And then we, again, as I mentioned, kind of brought that in to say, well, you need to put it in your data center. We can deploy it there too. At the end of the day, Palette is a Kubernetes application, cloud native microservice approach that provides resiliency regardless of where you want to deploy it.
Makes sense. Cloud native for cloud native people. I guess there's one other point that I've always been really fond of when writing stuff like our website, which you can now go and view. We have this this architecture where we decentralize a lot of the intelligence, the Palette brain, into the workload cluster itself. I guess one of the risks of a downtime situation like this is if you lose the brain, what happens to the rest of the workers? That's not something that's going to affect our customers. Do you want to explain a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, I mean, I think just looking at that, we built a decentralized architecture. So Pallet, the platform, lives in a cloud or a data center, as I just mentioned. That's the area where you make your configuration changes. But the agents that live in your clusters, wherever they may be, in a public cloud or on your on premises, in an edge location, in a factory, oil site, whatever they are, that distributed model makes those agents responsible for enforcing whatever Pallet's told it to do. And so, in a situation where you have an outage, and let's just suppose all of Amazon, all of Amazon went down, because that's what the news media often reports. We would still be having the same kind of performance and uptime for the clusters that were actually meaningful to your company, because they will survive with that agent living there and providing the desired state and maintainability. And when Pallet came back online, they would be able to call home and get any new updates that they needed.
Unless, of course, those workload clusters were in AWS as well.
That's all of Amazon went down. Those workload clusters that we have not a lot there, right?
Yeah, fantastic. So Ray, Justin's already mentioned that he's spoken to a few customers this week. What would you be advising customers to do if you got a call from a worried platform lead this week?
From the customer side of things, like if they're
what would you recommend they do as like their first thing Monday morning, or in this case first thing Tuesday morning?
Yeah, I mean it's funny. A lot of this actually comes down to business decisions versus technology choices a lot of times, right? So setting up something like multi-region disaster recovery, right? So if we are replicating data, well, now you've got data storage to deal with, you've got data exfil out of one region, like all of those things cost money. And then you have to weigh that versus like, what's downtime worth to us, right? Obviously, the longer the downtime is, the more that's going to cost, right? So you have to look at like how we weigh these things, right? But then when it comes to the technology in and of itself, there's like so much we have now that I think that has evolved. It just to kind of speak to the AWS side, since that's where a lot of my experience lies. Like now we have things like DynamoDB global tables, even though Dynamo was pretty tanked in US-East-1, as I understand it. You have Aurora global databases, right? So there's a ton of like technology now that we can use to actually be running in an active state versus sort of like a pilot light failover sort of state, right? And then the other part of it is, if you're mad at your particular vendor because they were down, well, the first question is what SLAs, what service level agreements did you agree to with this company, right? Like, so if the service level agreement says that we can be down for a few hours a year, well, they probably just cashed that check, right? So, so that's probably, where that lies, right? So a lot of this really comes down to like business decision, right? Well, if people are going to get mad that stuff was down, but at the end of the day, like if that was the plan, like we accept that we're going to be down for a few hours every year, however many nines that might be. That's ultimately business decisions at the end of the day.
Yeah, makes sense. So Shri, are there any? I'm thinking about the fact that Pallet itself may not have gone down, but we connect to lots of SaaS services. We use stuff internally. We've already spoken about our marketing website. Were there any outages or fragility you spotted in that kind of like extended web of technologies, and maybe some conversations you might be having with some vendors, naming no names, or patterns that we might be investigating, working on ourselves?
Yeah, the great question, right? I can tell you we have a massive number of, we would call it as packs, but the packs are all upstream that we collect, and we also build, fix the CVEs, and deliver it to our customers. Those packs, some of them, the upstream, we were not able to reach, right? But it did not affect our customers, because until you deploy those packs, and when you want to deploy that packs, until then you don't really see the value of that pack So it's more of a static content that you download to enable your deployment within your customer region, right? So we have seen it. We had a bunch of calls with our upstream providers. But again, I would say is the architecture that we built and the way that Justin has mentioned, where we have removed dependencies across different platforms so that customers can run their deployment without connecting to Pallet, without connecting to our upstream packs and stuff like that. So, yeah, the design from the day one is so important, and because it's a modern application, like Justin again mentioned, we built it. From that perspective, to make sure there is no single point of failure and customers can run by themselves.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and a thing that I really want to emphasize from what Justin was saying, like the way Pallet works, like its job is to put Kubernetes clusters in place, right? And that at the end of the day, like that's its main job, is to put a cluster out there, make sure that cluster is running what it's supposed to be running, right? And so if you lose connectivity to that, like we talked about, like all of AWS being done, let's talk about a more realistic thing, like you just lost your internet connection, right? Like that's a more realistic scenario, right? Like because everything is running in that cluster, in its location, your workloads, your production workloads are not going to be impacted by that loss of connectivity to Pallet. Sure, you're going to lose the ability to modify it, like to change it, to maybe deploy something new, but you probably have bigger things you should be working on in that moment, like your internet being down in that scenario, right?
Yeah.
I think, Ray, just real quick, just to go off that for a second. And as you mentioned earlier, like my focus for the last 4 or so years has been on edge and what's the challenges of edge. That is a very prominent challenge at edge. Hey, I'm going into an environment where the internet is either unstable, it's slow, it may not even exist, and I need to deploy Kubernetes in a manner that can be easily consumed by an operator who knows nothing about Kubernetes. That is what really our mission has been across the board. But for companies that are looking to deploy and leverage Kubernetes at the edge because of their application maturity or whatnot, we provide a mechanism to consume Kubernetes without the complexity. And I think that is really just goes to the things that we've done in resiliency in other areas.
Fantastic. I was just going to, while we're on the topic of network outage there, Ray, Justin, I know that you and I have been speaking this week about our work in the restaurant space, and when we talk about resiliency, and maybe this AWS outage is starting some broader conversations about where does risk lie. What do you what do you think those conversations should be around the sort of the trade-offs, the considerations for making sure that ultimately what we're trying to do here is make sure an application stays running and accessible? What are those kinds of conversations you would have with customers?
I think it is about what is that value of the application being up all the time for you. And there's a cost, there's a number to it, right? At the end of the day, this isn't a technology problem. We have the technology, as Ray discussed, to provide redundancy regardless of where it is. It's really about how much money do you want to spend on it. And I've seen scenarios, we were just talking about this earlier, where restaurants don't want to pay $40 a month because for redundant internet, because that's a cost to them, but they lose internet on average for 1 or 2 days a year. And that 1 or 2 days a year means lost revenue in a lot of cases. So how much is that lost revenue? And in their case, it's a couple $1,000s a day. So you do the math and you say, well, is it worth spending, $48 or $480 a year for redundant internet, or is it to maintain a couple $1,000s in revenue, or is it not? I mean, I think that's a simplistic way to look at it. There certainly are also some probably internal political challenges in other areas that customers deal with. We try and talk about what's the goal. Your goal is for your application to be available for your customers 100% of the time. Okay, well, how do we meet that goal? And by designing in the ways that we've looked at Pallet, and by designing in the ways that other applications that are mission critical are designed, it can be achieved. It's just a matter of, do you want to put the effort in or not?
And that's when you get to the real answer, which is here's how much it's going to cost and here's how much effort it's going to take. Does that really meet your appetite for availability, or are you actually kind of okay with a 3 nines kind of situation?
I think we see a lot of this, like right now, you'll have these conversations for the next few months. Oh, Amazon, this outage and people and redundancy. And, unfortunately, like everything else, we become kind of immune to it. And so over time, that becomes a line item on someone's budget. Oh, we have redundant regions that cost X number of dollars. Man, we were getting tight this year. We're going to cut that. And then eventually, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years later, there's another outage and the conversation comes back up and we're not immune to it anymore. So like with anything, the ebbs and flows of this happen. I think at the end of the day, when you're looking at your application, what does it mean to your customer? I mean, we deal in a lot of different spaces: healthcare, oil and gas. We mentioned retail and restaurants. The application that runs in retail for the retail business is very important. We were talking with a restaurant earlier today, and especially in like casual dining, where the customer has gotten everything they wanted out of that experience. They ate their food, they've done everything they wanted, and if your systems are down and you can't process the check, there's a high likelihood that they pay cash and that cash never gets seen by the restaurant, right? I mean, that's just the reality of life. But we also deal in the healthcare space where you're talking about systems that are monitoring the life of people. I would argue that application is more mission critical to just the general life than a restaurant application.
Yeah, you would hope that healthcare provider is paying the $40 a month.
Correct. Yes, exactly. So it is all about that value that you're getting out. I think everybody's application is important. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But there certainly is something more in life and death or a mission critical application that's being used for government purposes that is keeping people safe. Those types of things, I think, probably hold a little more weight.
That feels like a great place to finish. I'm going to turn the lower thirds back on so you know who I'm thanking. Gentlemen, this has been a wonderful discussion. I'm going to just leave you with this message at the bottom. If you do find that anything you've heard today about how we have architected Pallet makes you think that should be my Kubernetes management platform, do give us a visit at spectrocloud.com. Get started. I promise the website is working now, so you can do that.
We'll also be at KubeCon coming up here soon
we're
as well.
Going to be at KubeCon. We're going to be at GTC. We're going to be at AWS reInvent. So our friends at AWS. So do come and meet some of these lovely folks face to face. Ask them your toughest questions about resiliency, and I'm sure you'll get great answers. Thank you very much, guys. Take care.
Have a good one. Thanks, Ant.
Take care.